Hello, this is Doug Brunke, CEO of the Global Chamber, and we are doing a series of videos on with people who are experts in their field, are successful at exporting, and today we're speaking with Wendy Jameson, CEO of Kolnatech. Welcome, Wendy.
Good morning.
We really appreciate your sharing with us all your learnings and your insights. And today, because of your marketing background and because you guys have been so successful at Kolnatech, we're going to be talking about listening to customers. You're really good at it. There's not everyone is good at that, and so we thought it would be valuable to talk about how do you do that across borders. Not only technically, how do I listen to that person? But now you're adding the additional complexity of language, and you're adding the additional complexity of they have specific needs, probably different than other countries, and so how do those needs relate to my offering and my product? And so you've excelled at that. So I'm wondering, given how at one level you're doing it in the U.S., now you're crossing a border, you've got language, you've got culture, you've got a variety of things going on. How do you sort through all of that noise to be able to really identify where the opportunities are for Kolnatech?
Well, like you said, there are two ways of listening. There's being present with your customer, sitting there across the table from him or her, typically a him, especially in Asia. And one thing that worked really well for Scott and I was he would be making a presentation, and as he's talking, because when you're talking, you're really focused on giving, on expressing, on how do I communicate my message, a difficult technical message, to someone else who then is going to translate it. And did they just understand based upon their reaction, because you have to watch your interpreter, then interpret it to someone else. So he would be focused on what was happening there while I'm watching process. We talked about how that was different. And in psychology in particular, as a counselor, what are you looking for? You're doing two things. You're managing, there's two things going on, content and process. The content is what I'm talking about. And I can, when Scott was presenting, he was focused on content, very deep in the technical content. I don't know content nearly as well as he does, and I never will. But what I do well is I watch process. How are people seated in a room? Where have they seated me? I noticed that until they got to know me, it was based on the three letters behind my name. It was really just having, we initially didn't have that on our cards. It was just Wendy Jameson, co-founder. And putting the CEO behind my name actually helped give me a bit more status, particularly as a woman in an Asian country. So how people are seated at the table makes a difference, and how you're seated at dinner with the Chinese as well. Well, really any Asian country, including the Koreans, how you eat with them, that's all listening, that's all participation, that's all selling at the same time. Dinner is as important as anything. In fact, early on can be more important than the actual content of the meeting, because they have to, I'm talking about Asia in particular, and that's Taiwan, Singapore, China, Korea. We have not done much business in Japan yet. We've not traveled there. But having a meal with them is about getting to know one another, and for them it's very important to get to know you before they will do business with you. They want to be able to trust you. So content, again, even at dinner, is about talking about that, the content of our lives, asking questions of them, and sharing to a certain extent. They're pretty open about sharing, and they want you to understand their culture. So all the time, though, I'm often not even talking much. I'm watching the people interact. I'm watching Scott interact with them and their reaction to him, to see. And then we would go afterwards and we would we would process the process. We would process about what happened in that meeting and how do we adjust it? How can we do it better? Do you think he'll buy? At this point, you should have stopped so that he could keep moving on. But listening, okay, so aside from the psychological aspect of watching process, there's listening to the subtle differences. I guess we think that we're conveying a message that is not, you gotta have that feedback loop. Am I getting it across? We thought, I'll give you an example. Our very first time we went to Korea, we got the call from Samsung saying, come make a presentation. And then when we went to Korea and made the presentations, and it's very interesting to go through Samsung because they check everything. I had to have shots and everything, and it was during bird flu season. It was January, so we had to have our temperatures taken. It was very high tech how they did it and where you meet. It's pretty cool actually to see what's going on there. But so we went and met with a number of organizations inside of Samsung and then a number of other organizations at the same time. But they told us clearly, you build this. If you make this, how we say you make this. We brought a prototype with us. They laughed at it. They thought, you don't know what you're making. But they said, if you can make this, come back in March and we will buy this. And we were talking about $1.5 million in business. And so, of course, being two people at this time, we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. We crammed and put everything together, got all our ducks in a row, and flew back to Korea for another 2 weeks, and went back to visit them in March. And they said, oh no, that's not what we meant. We're not ready to buy this. So they were. I don't know what they were trying to tell us, but on the one hand, they were saying, yeah, we buy. But then on the other hand, they're like, well, maybe not so much. We're not so sure. And we had spent all this time, all this money. We did end up refining that product, and it is now in our product store. But it wasn't the kind of sale. It was a real learning experience and a real example of how what you think they're telling you is not necessarily what they're trying to tell you. We would ask them the first time that we went to Korea. I think I tallied upwards of 14 million, I thought, in business that I thought we could get. But there were these other factors that we didn't understand, that we, over the years, began to understand better about the Koreans. Just took a little time.
Gotcha. So there's the listening within the meeting, listening to the what's going on in the process that's directing you probably more tactically relative to what products you might offer. And then if at the end of the day you take a step back and you get all of that feedback, you've got a certain business plan you're using in these countries. And so from that experience, you now take a step back and say, I need to adjust my plan at a higher level. So that's also listening, right? So how do you adjust that more strategic view, given what you're hearing from different markets around the world?
When you talk about it that way, it's interesting. What comes to mind is how we are constantly adjusting, and that's, you have your basic. This is what we're building, right? You know what your products are going to be. You know the problem you're trying to solve, and we're still doing film thickness monitoring, but how you present that does have to adjust to a certain extent. We would go to these different countries and we would do the process and sit back. We spend hours and hours and hours talking about, we go to dinner and we talk about strategy, but nothing is really written down. That's the hard part about, when you finally want to go after venture capital, or you want to go after, go to any kind of capital acquisition phase, you have to have it written down. But the thing is, it's so fluid, especially in the early years. It's very difficult to really kind of write it down because you just don't know if it's going to be exactly the same in 6 months, because you are adapting. And Finland is nothing like Singapore. So you're constantly adjusting it. And to put it into a plan is difficult to actually, to written plan is difficult to do. I know people tell us, a consultant will tell you, you should have a written plan and you should stick to it. I don't think that's very realistic. Having been a consultant myself, it's not terribly realistic that you're going to stick to your plan. I can remember when we were also, we won the ACA Challenge Grant. We were the first Valley winners of the Challenge Grant, and I went to an event and I met another winner outside of the Valley, and she was telling me about how after 2 years, we met again, a couple years later, and she said, we've had to change our business model. We can't move fast enough. We can't acquire funding to grow. So she went from being a product-based, and she was an FDA, she had to get FDA approval for her medical device, going from product focus to service focus. She was saying, that's the only way that we can stay alive, and we are going to stay alive. We're going to make this happen. You'll get it out there eventually, but you might have to go about getting that in a different way.
Gotcha. So we get back to being flexible, being resilient, being persistent, all the things that seem to be a core to your success.
Well, I think it's essential for any entrepreneur of any kind of business to be persistent and flexible and determined to not fail. There were times when we could have failed, that we probably should have failed. We had a vendor die the day before he delivered. He was to deliver 50 products to us, and we had to reverse engineer it and buy back our IP from our competitor. So you just never know what's going to happen, and then you have to be flexible enough to adjust to that. I know that early on, when we first started this, I was inflexible. I was saying, no, this is the product, this is the brand, this is the only thing, stay focused. And there is something to be said about focus. You really do need to stay focused on just a core product. If I were to advise anybody, I would say start with one product and then grow from there. Make sure that that product is the one product. I think one of the mistakes that we made was trying to have too much and then trying to serve too many markets, and we just didn't have the funding to market to all of them, so we were kind of all over the place. And that probably cost us in funding as well, because we wanted to make sure that we had a backup plan, and we always had that backup plan, but it could, it's a trade-off, how many backup plans in case these markets, because you just simply can't serve a lot of markets, especially if you're self-funded like we've been.
Gotcha. Congratulations on your flexibility and resilience and persistence. Thank you for sharing today. And we'll be talking next with Wendy about creating a strong foundation for exporting and how Colnatech decided to export.
Okay.
Coming up. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.